Hi, everybody. Lynn Burkhead with MajorLeagueFishing.com with Kurt Dove from my favorite state in the whole wide world,
right.
the great state of Texas, from Del Rio down there in Lake Amistad country. Kurt, welcome to Major League Fishing.
Lynn, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
You know, I remember when we went to Lake, I always call it Amistad. What do you guys live in?
Yeah,
Is it Amistad?
Amistad's correct. You hear a lot of pronunciations, Amistad, or the locals call it Amistad. So
I'm always afraid when I talk to a local I'm saying it wrong, but Amistad.
Amistad works.
When we went down there and stayed at the resort that Byron Velvick owns and staged the first Major League Fishing tournament,
right.
It was a jerkbait tournament. And I was amazed at the show that Kevin Van Dam put on, that Brent Ayler put on, and others put on with the jerkbait. And that's one of your favorite techniques. There's some great jerkbaits out there. The Strike King KVD slash bait is a good one. Livingston makes some great jerkbaits, and Lucky Craft makes the pointer. All three of those companies make some great jerkbaits, but there's a lot of other jerkbaits out there. Which one do you use and why?
Well, you're right. You know, there's a lot of great jerkbaits out there. My favorite jerkbait is an Imaflit 120. The reason I love an Ima jerkbait is because of its versatility.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it really runs the perfect depth. It's not too deep, but it's not too shallow. It generally runs in that 5 to 6 foot range. And you know, there's a lot of great advantages to that. You know, one thing is that when you're buying a premium bait, you know, you can get it unhooked. You don't have to leave it on a tree or at the bottom of the lake. So when it's running 5 or 6 foot, you can always get it back. But really, what makes it special is the action that the bait creates. You know, it's you know, the Imaflit has you know, high tech engineering. It casts great in the wind, which of course was critical, you know, in some of the events that we've been fishing because it's been blowing so hard. So you know, it's the engineering is perfect, and you don't have to work the bait really hard. You know, a lot of times you see, you know, with some jerk baits, you have to really pump the bait really hard, and with this particular bait, you don't have to. You can do slight jerks with some pause, and it really has a great darting action, and of course it's a wonderful suspending bait.
And the darting action is really what sets a jerkbait, whoever makes it, apart. It's a wicked bait when you see it underwater, because the bass just almost can't resist when it darts one way and then almost backs up and kind of drifts another way. It gives that perfect wounded or dying bait fish kind of action.
Yeah, that's correct. You know, when you're working a jerkbait, I think there's a couple of really key tips, and some of those tips are when you're working the bait. Sometimes if you do pull it real hard, you can actually make the bait spin around. And when a bait's running away from a fish and then all of a sudden turns back right to that fish,
they can't handle it.
They can't stand it at all. So that's one really key to working a jerkbait. And the second key is how long of a pause do you really need to have? And then probably the third, and that just comes by trial and error. You know, you get out there, you try, you know, quick jerks or with a short pause, or you try some long extended jerks with a little bit longer pause. So just depending on really time of year, seasonal patterns, and then what the fish are telling you they want.
And you mentioned seasonal patterns. There are a lot of people that think a jerkbait is primarily a pre-spawn bait,
right.
Coming out of winter, coming in to that first part of spring when the water's still kind of cold.
Sure. Bass
are still kind of sluggish. And it excels at that time of the year. There's no question about that. But there are other times of the year that a jerkbait will work too, right?
100%. I mean, there's several times of year when a jerkbait will work well. And really it has to do with the bait fish, because, of course, that's what the bass are all about. Anytime you've got bait fish that are suspended, or they're pulled out, or they're on, you know, main lake points, or you know, even in the middle of the summertime, or even in the fall, and especially post-spawn, because what you get happens in kind of the time of year where, you know, in May, where we fish this particular, you know, event, the jerkbait, you know, when the fish come out of that post-spawn phase, you know, they move out to those main lake points. They're not feeding, you know, super heavily, but if something's out there and the bait fish are working out there, they're gonna migrate out to those points and take advantage of that. It's typically the first place that they're gonna stop before they do go into those deep summer haunts. That's what makes it a great bait in the post-spawn, and as you mentioned, you know, several other times a year as well.
When I think of a jerkbait, I think of clear water. I think of clearer water, perhaps would be the better term. I don't think of fishing stained water very often. Is it only a clear water bait?
So it definitely excels in clear water, but you can be very successful in stained water as well. Muddy water, not so much. Not my favorite place to throw it. Still, you know, you can catch fish in any condition with a jerkbait, but clear water, it excels. Stained water, it's still really good. And sometimes in stained water, it can, especially if you're fishing more shallow points or shallow areas, stained water can be still very, very effective. But muddy water, not as much. Again, I'll go back and just say it really excels in clear water situations.
Yeah, that's always been my experience. That clear water is where it is clearly a superior bait.
Yes.
Let's talk about how you work that bait, how you throw it, what you throw it on. What are the rod, reel, and line combinations you're going to work it with?
So starting with the reel, I use a 7-to-1 gear ratio reel. I'm trying to use any premium reel that's going to launch that bait just as far as you can get it, because a long cast can be really critical in jerkbait fishing, especially when you're in clear water. So 7-to-1 gear ratio. The reason why I like 7-to-1 gear ratio is when you're throwing it out and you're twitching it, you don't want to spend a whole lot of time reeling in the slack. And then when you get a bite, especially on a long cast, you want to be able to reel in that slack very quickly. So that's why I like the 7-to-1. Now, conversely, once you actually get the fish on, you don't want to just crank that thing to the boat. Jerkbait's got small little needle hooks, typically nine little needle point hooks on it. So it's not like a jig where you're just jacking them and winding them in and pluck them in the boat. With a jerkbait, when they bite it, you just want to stick those, just prick those needle points into that fish and then wind it in pretty slow. But that 7-to-1 is going to give you a lot of control. So that's the great thing about the 7-to-1 gear ratio. Going to the rod, I like a moderate to fast action rod, but definitely a medium, bend in the rod. So, or I should say a moderate or fast action tip with a medium styled action. Okay, so the medium action, what that's going to give you is it's going to give you that softness for that.
Almost like a shock absorber for those hooks.
Shock absorber, very well said. So that's why I like the medium action. I really prefer kind of a fast action tip because it does give me a little bit more control over the bait. I know exactly where it's going. I know exactly how far I'm twitching the bait, whether it's going to be long twitches or small, short twitches. So I like the fast action tip, but a moderate action tip can also be a good jerkbait rod as well. As far as line size, I use Toray line. I use 12-pound test fluorocarbon on a general basis. Sometimes I'll even go all the way down to 8, but I'll never go above 12. I'm typically not in the 14 or 16 category ever with a jerkbait. But the more pound test I can get away with, I'm going to use. So in a super clear situation, 8-pound test. Something that's pretty clear, 10-pound. If you have some slight stain, maybe 2-foot visibility, then I'll stay with the 12-pound test. And of course, you can use that pound test rating because really what we're talking about is diameter of line size, right? So if you need it to run a little bit deeper, you can go to a smaller line pound test because it's going to have a smaller diameter and get your bait to run a little bit deeper. Conversely, if you need to keep it up in the water column a little bit, then you can go to the higher pound test. Recently I've been fishing it in that 5 to 10 foot zone. So I've been staying with that 12-pound test. I'm a flit jerkbait. It's perfect in that situation.
Let's talk about cadence of retrieve. I watch all of you guys. So you watch Kevin Van Dam, and he's got a cadence and a retrieve of a jerkbait that's all his own. I've never really seen anybody that duplicates exactly what he does.
He hits it hard.
He hits it really hard. And he creates a lot of that backup, that pause. And then I've seen other guys like Shaw Grigsby and other guys, yourself, other guys, they have a little bit different type of retrieve or cadence of retrieve. So how do you develop the proper style of retrieve? How do you make sure the bait is working right, the action in the water is what it's supposed to be?
Well, the first way, and it's kind of a cliche, experience, right? You've got to be able to get bites with a particular retrieve that you're going to have confidence in. And really, Kevin, with his retrieve, he knows exactly what his bait is doing. Myself, with my particular retrieve, I know exactly what my bait's doing. If I need to adjust it from my normal retrieve, then I can make those bait adjustments that will happen when I change my retrieve. Same as Kevin or Shaw, like you mentioned, anytime you can make those small adjustments. So really the key, I think, for making it work for each individual angler, talking really about an angler's identity, right, is to go out there, throw the jerkbait, start getting some bites on it. Throw it in the right conditions when you know you're around some fish, and start getting some bites on it. And then just start working your own preferences. Then you can adjust with those preferences. If I tell you exactly how I work it, and you go out and try and do it my way, it's probably not going to be the correct way for you. So I encourage people to go out and throw a jerkbait, figure out what works for them. Then they can make those adjustments based on conditions or how the fish are reacting to the bait themselves through their own retrieve.
Almost every professional angler has a way of tweaking a favorite bait. Now, obviously, the jerkbait is one of your favorite baits. Do you leave it pretty much alone out of the package, or do you do certain things to tweak it to get it to your liking?
So I pretty much leave mine alone right out of the package. If there's some adjustments that I will make, it has to do with the hook size. The hook size will play with how much it suspends, or if it will if you'd like it to sink slowly, or if you'd like to have it to a small rise. Small adjustments in hooks. And it's not even just the size of the hooks. Even manufacturers, are going to create their hooks differently. If you have X hook, then it might be a thick wire hook, so it's going to be a little bit heavier. Whereas if you went to Y manufactured hook, it may be a smaller, thinner wire hook. So each of those types of hooks are going to make the bait react a little bit differently. And these baits, these baits are so fine tuned that just a small little change like that will really, not drastically affect the bait, but it will change the bait enough that you can create an action that maybe the fish will react to.
Let's talk about one final thing about jerkbaits. You mentioned it already to some degree. Hooks are not very big, and therefore a lot of fish get lost on the jerkbait.
Yes.
If you're going to throw the jerkbait, I've always believed you've got to be prepared to have your heart broken.
Yeah.
How do you keep your heart from being broken? Is there a way you can maximize your chances to get that fish to the boat?
Certainly. I think the first thing you need to do is don't put a whole lot of pressure on these fish. When you're jerkbait fishing, you're not just going to crank them in. You really want to utilize that soft rod tip and wind them a little bit slower. Really want to keep them down under the water column. If you'll notice, when you're out practicing or you're out, having a good time catching some fish just for fun, play with when you wind fish in, play with how fast you wind them in and how it makes that fish react. You'll really learn a whole lot about, when is the right time to really crank them and drop them in, or when's the right time to crank them a little bit slower so that they stay down. So, it's not always necessarily bait specific. It could be fish specific by how that fish is reacting when you're winding it in. But obviously, it's a reaction or a decision that needs to be made pretty quickly. And quite frankly, as you mentioned, you're not always going to make the right decision, but as long as you have that experience and have the knowledge of the process, it'll put you in a better position to make the right decision about how to land fish.
Well, it's one of the best baits out there to fish, and Kurt Dove is one of the best anglers who fishes the jerkbait. We're glad to have him at Major League Fishing. If you'd like to learn more about Kurt or the technique of jerkbait fishing, or really anything to do with the sport of bass fishing, go to MajorLeagueFishing.com.